Hey guys, it's Amy from Colorado Mountain Living, and today I want to teach you a life-saving skill. It might not be the first skill you think you need, but I think being able to cook a decent loaf of bread is priceless. So first thing I want to tell you about this recipe. The difference between this bread and traditional breads is that we're not going to use any yeast. We're using a true sourdough recipe, meaning that we catch a culture and we use that to create the leavening in the bread and amazing flavor. And it was brought to my attention from a friend that if you're living at a higher elevation, using a technique like this can help with being able to produce a decent loaf of bread. So one of my worries moving to elevation at over 9,000 feet was that baking was going to become a mystery. I wasn't going to be able to have predictable results, but this recipe has been a lifesaver, a game changer, and I make it on a regular basis. So, would you believe that an apple and flour are the only ingredients that you would need to make this recipe? Usually these are ingredients that we have on hand, and in fact, I like to stock up on flour. I think everyone can appreciate the Costco size that you can get. This is a 25-pound bag of flour. So, this is definitely the way to keep your costs down, buying in bulk. One of the benefits of using bread flour is it's got extra higher gluten content, so you get nice consistency in your dough, and you get a nice, thick, chewy loaf. So, stock up on flour, go for the big size, because you'll be making this bread every week. So, how does it work? How does an apple turn into bread? Well, this is the secret on getting your sourdough ready. Chopping up the apple, and then putting it in a container and adding water will create an environment that will ferment the fruit. The natural yeasts and bacteria that are present in the fruit will start to eat the sugars, and you'll start to get this fizzy water that is perfect for mixing with your flour to produce sourdough. It really speeds up the process compared to traditional sourdoughs where you mix water and flour together and you leave it out on the counter for a few days. This gives you a high concentration of soured water that comes from fruit, and you can use the entire amount in your recipe. All right, I'm going to show you how to set up the ferment water. I usually use a large container, something quart sized. I've got this recycled plastic container here. I'm going to chop up my fruit and put it in here first. So what I'm using is 1 apple and about 6 dried apricots. So you could use 2 apples, you could use all dried fruit, but I noticed that I get really good results when I mix the two. So I'm going to use 1 chopped up apple, and it doesn't have to be chopped in any kind of special way, just a loose chop. Doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't matter about the seeds, you're just trying to get some surface area of the fruit. Pop that into the container. Loosely chop my apricots in the same way. They're pretty sticky because they're dried. I'll pop these in as well. And then just filling the container of water to the top. I even have a little bit more room, so I might add some more water. Then the next step is to put on the container top, the lid, container top, whatever you want to call it. So you put on the lid, kind of tight, and then you leave it in a warm area. I'm going to leave it next to the wood stove. Now I don't want to boil it or try to cook it. I'm just trying to have the water be room temperature to encourage the growth of the yeast and bacteria that are going to help make our sourdough starter. So basically just don't put it in the fridge or put it outside. You want to be semi-warm. And every day you can come by and shake it up and let some of the gas out by unscrewing it, then screwing it back on. You're trying to make a fizzy water, and it's going to happen in a matter of a few days. So it takes normally about 3 days for it to be fizzy enough, and then you'll know by the smell, the taste, the fizziness that it's ready to be used in a recipe. So that's the first step. You do have to do it a few days ahead of time before you want to make your bread. So there's a little bit of planning involved, but if you want to make bread next week, get your water started this week. Stages. Right now I've got my bread in 3 stages. So last night I baked a loaf, and we've got full loaf of bread completed. Now, oops, video fail. I already sliced into it this morning because I like to have my peanut butter and toast every morning. But take a look. The flavor is very tangy and delicious, so you're not lacking on any flavor. The recipe will make about 3 smallish loaves like this, medium-sized loaves. So you can eat one now and put 2 in the freezer. The second stage I've got is my leftover dough. I like to keep it in a Tupperware that's got a lid on it so it keeps it from drying out. But the longer it stays in this state, the more sour it gets. So you can get a really tangy sourdough. It's great. I don't know why I love it so much, but hopefully you will too. If you really like tangy sourdoughs, keeping your dough in the refrigerator for a few days and maybe waiting a few days till you make your next loaf is really beneficial for developing more of that flavor. And it also has a chance for the sourdough culture to work on the gluten and soften it, and you'll get a stretchier. The more stretchy you can get, the more it'll be easy for your dough to be able to form those air pockets and you'll get nice leavening that way. All right, and then the third stage, I also have some dough in the pan right now that's rising. I've got it set next to the wood stove, so there's a nice heat there. I put a little plastic bag around it so it doesn't dry out. And I can see the bubbles in the top. But there's some nice leavening action happening here. And I think it's almost ready for the oven. I'm going to probably pop this in another 30 minutes or so once the oven gets preheated. So those are the 3 stages that my bread is in. Same recipe. I just decided to cook one loaf first and wait for the next loaf to kind of get a little bit more flavor. And I wanted to have this one have a chance to rise a little bit more. This one I didn't let rise that much last night because I was in a hurry and I wanted to make sure I had my toast for the morning. So anyway, I made that one really fast. It didn't have as much of a chance to rise. But I'm going to let this one sit for another 30 minutes and then I'll pop this one in the oven too. Next, I'm going to go over the particular steps in making this recipe up. I'm going to give you the amounts and the stages and how to split it up to get a really good loaf. One of the secrets of this recipe is hydration, making sure you have adequate water to your flour. It's actually a 1-to-1 ratio of water to flour. So that's how you get this really good loaf. One thing that you do need is very helpful and being accurate and getting a good result is a kitchen scale. So this is what I have. It's just a digital kitchen scale. I think I paid $15 for it on Amazon. And we're going to be weighing equal parts water and equal parts flour in terms of weight. 50 grams isn't much. It's less than a quarter cup. And I'm just weighing it out and make sure my scale is on 0 still. And then I'm going to pour that right into the flour.
So after you get it all mixed up, you want to cover it with plastic wrap so that way it gives the chance for the culture to develop into the flour. And then after a few hours, you can repeat step 2, 50 more grams of flour, 50 more grams of water, equal parts, mixing it up again with the paste that you already have. Stir to combine it all. And then the same thing, you're going to let it sit for another few hours to let that culture develop. You want to get the bubbles showing. So that's the next thing. Wrap it up in plastic. Let it sit a few more hours. And then when you come back the next time, you're going to do a little bit more. You're adding 150 grams of water and 150 grams of flour. And this is your total starter. Once it's bubbly, it's ready to use. So you're looking for the bubbles. The bubbles on top. That means it's active and fermenting and ready for the rest of the flour. So this is the fun part of the recipe where you get to add in the rest of your ingredients all at once. First, we're measuring out 1,000 grams of water. Hopefully you can make that with your ferment water, but if not, go ahead and use tap water to make the full 1,000 grams. And then this is also where you add salt. 2 tablespoons, or if you like it a little bit saltier, you could measure out 30 grams of table salt. I'm using kosher salt in this example. And then you're going to stir to combine. It does take a little while to stir, so I just cut it short on the video. But stir up your starter, and then you could add 1,500 grams of flour. Now, if you want, there's an option where you could subtract 100 and use gluten to make up the 1500, and that'll give you a little bit more of a chewy texture, and that can be nice. So that's what I did in this video. And then to combine it well, you might have to get in there with your hands to really work through the dry spots. But once you get it combined, you can let it stay in the fridge overnight, and then when you take it out of the fridge the next day, let it warm up first before you start working the gluten. The next step is going to be some kneading and stretching of the dough. One technique you can use to stretch out the dough is to kind of try to lift it out of the bowl in one direction and then fold it over in half. And then every couple of hours come back to the bowl, wet your hands so the dough doesn't stick so bad, and then try to pull it out of the bowl and stretch it. It's very sticky, but if you can try to stretch it really high and then fold it back down a few times like that, and then every couple hours see if you can get it to stretch a little bit further, you should see some progress. You should see the dough becoming more stretchy and less rippy. It shouldn't rip as easily. Right now at the beginning you can see it rips really easily when you pull it apart with your fingers, but you're trying to go and get the texture where it's going to make really long strands and you could almost see through it, and that's called stained glassing, where you could almost see the light through the dough. So trying to really get some good stretches in there. It takes, over the course of the day, when you do stretches long like this, by the end of the day you'll see that it's much more flexible and pliable. Once you get it to the consistency where you feel like it's making really good stretches, you can go ahead and divide your dough. I usually take a pan and will grease it with coconut oil, and then I'll put 1/3 of this dough into the pan and let it rise. And then I'll divide. Sometimes I'll save the dough for another day. The rest of it can go back in the fridge. But once you get your dough ready, I'll show you the next step.
So I've got my loaf ready to bake. It rose next to the wood stove for a few hours, and it's a lot. There's a lot of air and leavening going on. So when I get the oven ready, I'm baking it at 475. So let your oven heat up to 475, and when the timer goes off, I put a foil hat on top of my loaf so it doesn't burn yet. I don't want my crust to form just yet, but it stays at 475 for 20 minutes. Now when your timer goes off, you want to open up your oven, take the aluminum foil off because that will develop the rest of your crust. And then turn your oven down to 450. That should finish off in the next 12 to 15 minutes. And by that time you'll be smelling, your whole house will smell like bread. It's going to be awesome. So when you get your loaf ready, just make a little tent for it. That way the bread can rise and it won't get stuck to the aluminum foil. So I just make a little tent, pop it in the oven 20 minutes at 475, then turn it down to 450, take the hat off, and let it finish 15 minutes at 450, and you'll have amazing bread.
There you have it, folks. Amazing sourdough bread baked at a high altitude, ready for dinner. And stay tuned. We'll be having more home cooking, homesteading recipes on videos to come.
How's that bread?
It's good bread.
Two pieces. Look.
2 slices.
2 pieces. Okay, 2 slices. Nice.
It's the best bread ever.
And you got butter on there.
Butter, yeah. It's also good with peanut butter.
Yeah.
With honey. With jam, maybe. Homemade.
Jam, yeah.
Can't beat it.
Put that butter on there.
Good. Kerry Gold butter.